How rude! A study spells out what kids are doing that adults describe as the rudest. In today's Mom Squad, we revisit this study and get expert advice on how to handle the lack of etiquette.
I think kids are little mimics, and so you have to know what they're watching. I hate to harp on technology today, but we are. Because if they see rude behavior, then they are going to behave in rude ways.
And then later in the show, if you feel like your kids are always fighting, Dr. Kim Bell explains how to handle conflict resolution for you and your child. That's today on Mom Squad. Everyone, thanks for joining me here on Mom Squad. I'm Maureen Kyle. With the kids home for the summer, are you noticing some rude behaviors? Or maybe you're looking around the park or public pool and seeing other kids behave in ways that you don't think is polite. Several months ago, we did a Mom Squad episode about rude behaviors. This stemmed from a study that asked parents and other adults what they observed about kids ages 5 to 17. The younger kids were criticized more for disobeying rules or not saying please and thank you. But the older kids were described as being most rude when they were absorbed in their phones. One of my favorite guests to have here is clinical psychologist Dr. Kim Bell. She talked about why these behaviors come out in kids and how to handle them. All right, so Kim, this survey, it was eye-opening and probably not surprising about the rudest behaviors. But I think my first impression, and I don't know if I'm just cynical, but considering it was parents who responded to this, and they all said, yeah, my kids are being rude by being on their phones all the time. Aren't these the boundaries we should be setting? Are we going wrong somewhere that we are saying that our kids are rude in these ways?
And you feel like you don't have any control over it?
And we don't have any control over it, yes, which I think a lot of parents feel like, I can't get them off their phones.
Right. Well, I think there's a fantasy that we have a lot of control over that. And I think that, okay, so let's talk about what you do have control over. Why don't we start there? Yeah. So first of all, you have to start very young, especially with this group. Keep in mind that the group we're talking about is technology native, so they've never been born into a world without an iPad or a phone. And little kids will start, we're seeing it in preschool, where kids play in the house area and they're on the phone. Because their parents are on the phone. And so when we start to see them play as if they are grown-ups, they are on the phone. And it used to be, you know, like this, but now it's like this, like they're playing on the phone. And the user interface of our technology is meant for native users. That might be hard to explain, but I have seen a child as young as 3 just whipping through an iPad.
Right, we've all seen that,
That technology, sort of native growing up with it. So this idea of putting it down or having it not be an important part of your life is sort of this myth of somehow we can go backwards in time. And so there's that piece of it. So you have to start young and be aware of your own technology usage. Like your child is not going to put their phone away at night if you don't put your phone away at night. And it is also how they stay connected to the world. Okay, so that's starting young, that's the first thing. But then we have parents who are like, oops, I didn't do that, so now what do I do? We have to think back to what we experienced as teenagers. Let's talk about the teenagers, because they're on their phone all the time. Teenagers, it used to be that you had to use the house phone, and you would have that long cord, and you'd hide in a closet, you know, and you would talk to your friends after school, and your parents would be like, get off the phone bill's high. Well, now we have cell phones with unlimited data, and if we were that age, we would be doing exactly the same things our kids are doing now, which is trying to stay in touch with our social support group as much as we possibly can, as we are separating emotionally and physically from the adults in our lives. So those friendships feel so important, and to have access to them 24/7 means that the impulse is going to be on the phone the entire time. I think that you need to start by just having some timeouts with these things. You have to start early. Phones downstairs at night. Plug them in downstairs
Yeah.
at night. But that includes the adults, because kids are watching very, very carefully. And I'm afraid gone are the days where you can get away with the type of parenting that says, do as I say, not as I do. It just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking, even if I was a teen and my corded phone went all the way to a restaurant and I'm sitting at the dinner table, out with my whole family, I would have pulled that phone all the way there.
Absolutely.
To be talking on the cord. Those boundaries, when you get resistance, here's what I would be afraid of. Teens like to rebel, especially if a parent's saying, well, no, it's been this way, you've been able to use your phone at dinner, and now we're not going to have, they're taking that away, now you can't use your phone. How do you start these boundaries without having that pushback? Is that possible?
Well, no, you're going to get pushback.
Yeah.
There's always going to be pushback. It's a matter of how big is the pushback. I think one of the things that we also don't have anymore is privacy. Let's talk about the fact that we don't have privacy.
Right.
There are too many videos up on YouTube. There are too many videos. You can Google anything and you can see it. And I talk to parents about this, because it's often parents who are putting these videos up of their kids. And so there isn't the same expectation of privacy. And the reason that's important is because I think too many of us have seen the videos of kids just falling out, like a real teenager tantrum when their phones get taken away. They're throwing things, they're kicking things, and parents get scared. That's an addictive response. That isn't usually how kids behave, but because we put everything up on the internet, it's what we see. And so parents, I think, are afraid that their kid is going to display this really outrageous behavior.
Yeah.
The majority of kids who don't have that kind of an addictive response can handle, they're going to get mad at you. I mean, they're just going to be mad, and they're going to, whatever, they're going to sulk, they're not going to talk to you, they're going to whatever. But if you are starting if you're going to start a new behavior, let's talk about just doing it in bearable bits. So you can have your phone the last 15 minutes of dinner. You can have your phone, don't just say, that's it, we're done. We have a new rule in this family that after 6 p.m. our phones are going away. That's never going to happen. Never going to happen. You're going to end up in a power struggle, because that child is going to find a way to sneak their phone, and then you're going to be like, oh, take it away for 2 days, and then that's a disaster. And then you realize you can't take it away for 2 days because they have to do homework on it.
Yeah.
Or they have a group chat where they're working on a group project. There's all these reasons why technology is necessary. So if you're going to introduce something really new, you have to introduce it in bearable bits, whether that's 15 minutes at a time, 30 minutes at a time, and build the tolerance, because we are all addicted to our phones, all of us.
Yep. I'm thinking about how I even have my phone in the ready at dinner, like within arm's reach, even if I put it away, just because what if my husband calls? What if my mom calls? What if,
Right.
So so I have to start to mirror that behavior. You brought up two things that kind of leads into one of the other rudest behaviors, which is gossiping. And when we have our social circles within reach, within our phones at all times, and then also you mentioned no privacy. I feel like gossiping, that just lends to even more gossiping in this generation than what we experienced as teens. How do we approach gossipy behavior if we're seeing our child being gossipy and we don't want them to have that behavior? It's a little trickier now. It
is trickier now, because you have to take a look at how much reality TV you're watching, because that's the whole premise of all of those shows.
Yeah.
Like, how much of those kinds of shows are you watching? How much do you personally enjoy them? And the other thing I think we don't do is these questions are asked, like, how do I get my teen to do this? How do I get my teen to do that? How do I get my kids to do this? My first question is, well, what did they say when you talked to them about it? And a lot of parents will be like, well, I haven't actually talked to them about it because I don't know what to do about it. And I'm like, okay. So we want to separate this idea of compliance and control with understanding and influence. I made that up, but let's do it that way, right? Those are words I just made up.
Yeah.
To sort of separate this idea of, well, I have to make my teenager do something. Good luck. If you try to make your teenager do something, what's happening is you're trying to maintain control at a time when your teenager is trying to push off and be ready to be their own person in the world. And so there is a natural tendency for things to clash. Teenagers go against family norms, they try things out, they push the boundaries. Your job is to be like those bumpers in bumper bowling, you know, and sort of like swoosh them back into the center of where you want them to be. But if you are under this idea of like, well, I can somehow get compliance and control and quiet, you're not going to get what you want, especially not with this generation.
Yeah.
So you have to focus more on understanding what's happening. So gossip makes people feel like they are part of a group, and teenagers want to be part of a group because they are separating from their original family unit and they need something to grab onto. The visual that I always use is this idea of like when you're in a pool and you push off from the side, you're floating for a little bit and that feels great, but then you want some stability, you want to put your feet down or grab the side. And when teenagers are doing that, they're grabbing onto peer groups, celebrity, social norm, being TikTok famous, anything that makes them feel less alone and more understood. So you have to come and connect with your teenager from a place of expecting the best from them.
It makes total sense. I'm going to lump in some of the rudest behaviors that were listed out separately in this survey, but to me this all makes sense. To lump them together. Some of the other rude behaviors that people complained about were not making eye contact, not saying hello, ignoring people, which to me is a social skill set, which also seemed to be like, well, if we have our phones in our face all the time and we're used to interfacing on a screen, that's really difficult to get them to do those things in person. So is there a way to influence them? Like what kind of training are we doing at home?
So here's what I would do. I would start as young as possible, because it is true, if you spend most of your time communicating like this idea of having to lift your head up to communicate face to face, a lot of kids are reporting these days this social anxiety. We see an increase in social anxiety. And we really felt it during COVID, because it was great that kids could go to class on Zoom. But what we found is that so many kids were having social anxiety because they're used to sitting in a classroom where, you know, there's a person behind them and a person in front of them. But when you're on Zoom, everybody's staring in your face. And they felt really observed and watched. And so they would turn their cameras off, and then teachers felt like they were being ignored. Like there was this whole thing about making eye contact. It's going to sound like a silly recommendation, but you have to find your teachable moments where they exist. So starting as young as you can, when you go out to dinner, have your child give their own order. Like talk to the wait staff, have them order their own thing at McDonald's, you know, wherever it is you happen to be, have them do the job. Have them order the pizza, whatever it is that they can do to interact, instead of, you know, we're usually in a very big hurry these days. And so to have a child who's 7, 8, 9, 10, kind of stumbling over their words or getting nervous about it, you know, again, at Hannah Perkins, we're always talking about doing for, doing with, and standing by to admire. And that includes social skills. So at first you're doing for, you're setting up play dates, you're doing all of these things for them, and then doing with them is really about letting them do the pieces and parts that they can do. And we have to be more intentional about that with this generation, because they don't have as much natural social contact because they do so much of it online and on their phone. And so we need to sort of find opportunities to practice with them their social skills.
Coming up, is lying and cheating normal, or is it indicating a larger issue in a child? Dr. Bell tells us when to worry about those little white lies. Ask any older generation and they'll tell you Many kids these days are losing interpersonal skills because they always have their face in a phone. If this sounds like your teen or someone you know, Dr. Kim Bell tells us what we can do to help kids who are struggling with interactions. I even just over the weekend met a very sweet teen, but clearly had trouble looking at an adult in the face and in the eye, and you know, they were blushing and they were turning bright red, and it was a struggle. And I'm thinking this teen will totally figure it out in the next couple of years. But then again, teens, if they are struggling with these social skills, they have to go on job interviews. They're going to have to maybe even in college be interfacing with professors without mom and dad there. For teens, where they're further down the road, is there a way to help get them to that point? Because we just talked about the younger kids.
I would do the exact same thing. I think start where you are and start in bearable bits. Because you're right, we don't want a teenager to, you know, kind of go out there looking for a job and not be able to manage themselves in an interview. I'm a fan of youth groups. I'm just a huge fan of youth groups for teenagers, or being involved in sports, being involved in yearbook. I don't care what kind of a club it is. It gives them a non-technological social outlet, and I'm a fan of those, whether they're in school or out of school. They don't need to be scheduled from the time they get up to the time they go to sleep, but anything that gives them an opportunity to interact with like coaches or advisors, because that's really the practice they don't have. This particular generation doesn't have as much exposure to interacting with adults outside the family. And the more we can give them that opportunity. So if they're on a team and they need to have a conversation with the coach, instead of you jumping in and doing for, do with, and then stand by to admire. The stand by to admire phase is important because they're the ones that are initiating the conversation with their teacher, with their counselor, with some kind of an adult, but you're there. You're physically there, standing by to admire, meaning that there's like a safety net for them. And I think sometimes, especially when we're busy, we have a tendency to go from doing for, maybe a little bit of doing with, and then the minute they show some independence, we're like, great, gotta go. I'm late for this or I'm late for that. And so sometimes we miss that step. But we just have to be more intentional, so you can do that with a teenager. Finally, the survey was talking about the younger age group, and some cities said the younger age group was the rudest, and it was more about disobeying the rules. And I'm picturing, when I read that, I was picturing, like, you know, we're at the park and you're going, no, you know, Timmy, don't go up the slide the wrong way. And then the kids just blatantly look at you and go, okay, mom. And then they go up the slide. When it is that type of behavior consistently, what is it that parents can do? Like I always say, well, I go into mean Italian mom mode, but you know, what is it that we're supposed to be doing to get them to know what the rules are and then obey the rules at that young age? Okay, so kids ages 5 and up have learned how to lie. It's a big thing to learn how to lie. Like, oh, I can say something that's not true. And so they practice it a lot. And so you'll find them cheating at games, and you'll find them lying. These are developmentally appropriate behaviors.
Okay, good, because I have one that does that all the time.
Oh yeah, they cheat, they lie. And it's I could go in deeper, but it's part of aggression and all kinds of other things that are going on developmentally. But essentially what we want to do is we want to not let them get away with it. And at the same time, have these teachable moment conversations about, why were you just doing that? You know, because kids have a hard time losing. As soon as they hit 5 or 6, they start to really feel like, I'm bad if I lose. And so you'll see this kind of pushback. And if you can have conversations about that, like everybody loses. You know, everybody loses. Everybody's friend says they don't want to play with them. Everybody has a bad moment. Nobody's perfect. You are right and perfect just the way you are, with all of your flaws. You don't have to be, you know, everybody's favorite, or you don't have to be all of these things. So we have to start there. And I think kids are little mimics, and so you have to know what they're watching. I hate to harp on technology today, but we are. Because if they see rude behavior, then they are going to behave in rude ways. If they see kids breaking the rules and it's funny because it's on a YouTube video or something, then they are going to mimic what they're seeing. So you have to be very careful about what you're letting your younger kid watch, because it's going to fly in the face of potentially, you know, things that you want.
Right.
And then it's a matter of safety. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, if you get loud every time they break the rules, then you're just somebody who gets loud. If you reserve your loud for one trial learning, you know, like touching a hot stove, we know. Running up a slide, if there's kids coming down, one trial. So then when you raise your voice, they're like, oh, that's serious.
Right.
And it's just going to happen. Like, there's no perfect way.
Yeah.
And you're never going to get 100% compliance, never.
Right. No, I don't even comply still, 100%. So can't expect that out of the kids. Like I said earlier, Dr. Kim Bell is one of my favorite experts to have on Mom Squad. And when we come back, she talks about the ever important conflict resolution, helping kids who are having trouble getting along with siblings and friends. We've all had a child come home from school and say one of their friends made fun of them, made them mad, or there was an argument on the playground, or even at home, fighting among siblings. Dr. Kim Bell gives us a playbook on how to understand conflicts and encourage a healthy resolution.
What our job is as parents. What is the actual job of a parent? Your job is to bring a human being into the world and do the very best you can to create an adult who can function and work and be in healthy relationships and contribute to the world. That's the job, right? In a nutshell. So one of the things that is true about human beings is that we are often in conflict with each other. We have conflicts with our coworkers. We have conflicts with authority. We have conflicts. It's part of being human and living in a society. So we have to teach in the home, we have to model a form of conflict resolution. You know, when we talk about different types of parenting, there's authoritarian parenting, there's permissive parenting, and then right in the middle you have authoritative. And that's where we find kids most successful. The kids who are most successful grew up in a household that had a very authoritative, but not authoritarian. So my way or the highway is on this end of the spectrum. There are no rules in our house are on this end of the spectrum. We want to be in the middle. And so when you practice resolving conflict at home, then you build up a tolerance for disagreements, for this is how I feel, this is how you feel, is there a compromise? If you behave in a certain way that impacts somebody else negatively, there's a natural consequence to that, and there's a restitution that can be made. We've talked about that when you and I have talked about discipline. So first we start there. Those are the building blocks. Then we want to start with tolerating the negative behaviors or the negative feelings. Let's not talk behaviors. Then we want to tolerate negative feelings, which is being left out. Somebody doesn't want to play with me. Somebody else has a friend, and I'm feeling like I'm not the most important friend anymore. Those are all developmentally natural experiences that we have to survive. What else can you do? Okay, you weren't invited this time. I'm sure it's because of whatever their rules are and not because of you. So we have to help them tolerate it. And I think too often we hate to see our kids in pain, and so we jump in too quickly to fix it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's for conflict resolution. I recommend in our very busy world, if you can, to have a relationship with your kids' friends' parents, so that you can, in an ideal situation, if two kids are having a conflict, you can contact that other parent and say, I think our kids are having a struggle. Not that you guys figure it out and make rules for the kids, but in a perfect world, you're getting those kids together and you're helping them to resolve it. Like, well, let's sit down and talk about what's going on.
Yeah. So when do you do that, though? Because is there an age group that you can do it, and then a certain point where it's like, no, you can't? Because I think that's another struggle that parents have is, when do I jump in? And, you know, at what point in the conflict do I insert myself?
You know, well, first of all, younger, obviously, you can jump in sooner because they don't have the skills yet. For an older child, I'll say it again, I'm very redundant. Well, what did they say when you asked? Did they want help?
Yeah.
There's been a thing going around lately that I absolutely love, which is this idea that when somebody comes to you to complain about whatever, or is having a rough feeling, that your question is, do you need me to help you fix this, or do you want me to just listen? I think where I would draw the line, my line in the sand, would be if I start to see the mental health of my teenager suffering, if I start to see signs of not coming out of their room, changes in appetite, changes in sleep habits, then I would start to really worry, okay, is this a conflict or is there some bullying going on? And trying to create as much open communication as you can, because bullying I don't tolerate.
Yeah.
Bullying, I will say to a child, this is the line.
Yeah.
And as your parent, I'm not going to allow anybody to treat you this way. Who do we need to talk to?
Right.
And oftentimes that's about going to the school, because that's where it tends to happen, unless it's happening online, in which case you have to make adjustments there.
Dr. Kim Bell also recommends teaching your kids the I phrases, like I feel bad when you say something like that. The younger you can start this, the more they'll increase their emotional intelligence. If you want to see her explanation of what to do specifically for preschool kids, head to our Mom Squad with Maureen Kyle Facebook page. We'll have an extra episode available there and on our YouTube page. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you right back here next time.